my pleasure to have Mark Bettian give the third in this kickoff series of the BRACE project, which is about building resilience to seismic risks in Bhutan. Before I introduce Mark, I just want to point out that the fourth and final seminar of this kickoff series is tonight in this room at 6 o'clock. Aaron Velasco, who's sitting in the audience from the University of Texas at El Paso, will be giving a talk about the Nepal earthquake and its relevance to earthquakes that might happen in Bhutan. So please join us for that. Is there something happening before that seminar?
No, just drinks reception afterwards.
Okay, yeah. And there might be some drinks afterwards if you stick around. So 6 o'clock tonight. Mark is the Director for Communication, Outreach, and Education at the Southern California Earthquake Center. He's been there for 20 years now, I guess.
21. Yeah.
21 years. He got his undergraduate degree.
I started when I was 5.
Got his undergraduate degree from UCLA in earth sciences, geophysics. And decided after the Northridge earthquake that all that geophysics was fine, but you really had to do something more applied in order to reduce the risk and to help LA become a safer place from earthquakes. And so got a group of people together that were interested in running through an earthquake drill. And that group of people has, over the course of, I guess, 20, 25 years, merged into the greatest earthquake drill on the planet that now involves 8 million people, 10 million people?
55.
55 million people.
But who's counting?
But who's counting?
As they say.
For his work, the ShakeOut, as it's called, is started in LA and it's been exported around the world with other countries joining in this earthquake drill. For this phenomenally successful work, Mark's been honored by, for instance, the White House and the President, and I guess it's important to point out that
a couple years ago,
the previous President. And it's really, it's really one of SCEC's flagship programs. It's been incredibly successful in getting people involved in understanding what they need to do before an earthquake, during an earthquake, and after an earthquake. And we're hoping to learn some of the lessons from these kinds of earthquake drills for reducing resilience in Bhutan. So thanks very much for coming all the way from LA, Mark, and of course, take it away.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to learn a bit about you all, so I kind of can tailor my presentation. How many of you are students? And then the rest faculty and staff? Any other? And Earth Sciences department or school versus other? First Earth Sciences, the most, then some, okay, great. And how many of you have felt an earthquake? Oh, very good. Now, where was that for, wasn't here probably, right? Just a couple people shout out where that was.
California. Ontario.
In Canada. We have one of those in Los Angeles area too, so I figured that was. So you felt one in Ontario?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we have them there. We have one of our ShakeOut regions in Quebec because of the seismic zone there. And has anybody experienced actually like damage to where you were or any loss? Okay. And so probably the earthquakes you were feeling were either distant or not very strong, but you felt some earthquakes. And who's interested in kind of applying the science that you're studying kind of for hazard aspects or risk reduction? Is that, okay, about a third of the group. And maybe not even for earthquakes, but for just earth sciences in general and hazard issues. So because I'm going to be talking specifically about earthquakes, but a lot of what I'm talking about can be applied in other areas in kind of when you want to motivate a certain behavior to happen. All right, here's these really quick. So the Southern California Earthquake Center is a very large collection of group here, started in '91. We're headquartered at the University of Southern California, but we have scientists from around the world who come together to study what we call the natural laboratory of Southern California. Lots of different types of faults, lots of different scales of earthquakes, and of course a big impact on the built environment. In fact, we have more than 700 who are very involved. In fact, Max is on our planning committee, one of the leadership groups of the Earthquake Center. And we are funded by our National Science Foundation and U.S. Geological Survey. So that natural laboratory of Southern California, we actually have 300 faults that could have a magnitude 6.0 or greater earthquake. In fact, just in the last couple of days, new studies have come out talking about how indeed there could be bigger than we've thought before, and faults that were considered to be, in fact, this fault here, which is called the Rose Canyon Fault, goes down into San Diego, this is the border with Mexico. Then this fault here, coming up into Los Angeles, going to about a mile from where I live right here, called the Newport-Inglewood Fault. This goes from Newport Beach up into Inglewood, two cities. Those have been assumed for a while to be connected in some way because they look to be connected, but historically there wasn't evidence for whether they would rupture together because of where they connect is offshore. But researchers are making a case for yes, those could be connected together. You could have up to like a 7.5 if those were to rupture. It would be a very interesting type of earthquake in terms of the damage. So that's one, and then also up in this area, a new study is showing that the history, there was a paleoseismic study on the history of earthquakes in that area. It wasn't well understood before, showing that these happen historically every 100 years or so. The last in that area was in 1857, so we're overdue. But it's an average, sometimes it's like 20 years apart in the past, sometimes more than 200. So we have all these earthquakes, but just knowing where the faults are, doesn't tell us where, what the likelihood of earthquakes on those faults will be. So a large group of scientists worked together to create the Uniform California Earthquake Rupture Forecast, combining in the knowledge from a lot of different sciences, geodesy, showing how the plates are moving slowly over time, where the faults are, and also by doing paleoseismic work, looking at the history of faults, of course, or earthquakes on these faults, digging trenches. And then, of course, since 1933 or so, we've had a seismic network in California to be able to look at the seismicity of many different sizes of earthquakes and constrain those onto faults. Basically getting a really good understanding of what the overall forecast might be from all that information. This is actually not a forecast of just like an earthquake happening, but each of these points is a grid that represents the probability of a fault rupturing through, an earthquake rupturing through that grid point. So you could have a smaller earthquake just in that grid point, or you could have a very large earthquake that ruptures through many of these. And ultimately we get an estimate of overall for the whole state of what the probabilities are of earthquake rupture, as well as you have these for higher probabilities for certain faults. The southern San Andreas, basically this part here, being the highest probability in terms of a fault for an earthquake, perhaps 60% chance in the next 30 years of having a magnitude 6.7 earthquake. Why 6.7? Anybody know why we might choose that number for an earthquake? If you studied Southern California, maybe earthquakes, the Northridge earthquake was a 6.7. And so because that's something people can remember their experience of, that was chosen. They could have chosen any magnitude to calculate the probabilities for. And as part of the communication to the public, you want to choose things that they can relate to some degree. Unlike Hollywood, how many people saw the San Andreas movie? Good. It's good fun, but there are a lot of issues with it. The Hoover Dam, one of the largest dams in the United States, won't be affected by a San Andreas rupture. In fact, this is a kind of a precursor earthquake over by there on a fault that doesn't exist, and it won't break apart like crumbling sand as it was depicted. People on the east coast of the U.S. won't feel an earthquake in the western U.S. Large earthquakes in the east can be felt over much larger areas for scientific reasons in terms of how the waves propagate, but not a big earthquake on the west coast. It won't be felt really beyond, much beyond California. And we won't have these huge gaping chasms when the strike slip fault ruptures. I don't know how you could get that. And this picture doesn't show it very well, but it's depicting left lateral movement. The San Andreas is a right lateral fault, so Hollywood. And then also you won't have a 300-foot tsunami coming into San Francisco. These are depicted as 9.1 and 9.6 magnitude earthquakes. And fortunately, that forecast that we talked about, in most of California, that type of earthquake cannot happen. The faults aren't large enough to produce that type of rupture. The northernmost part of California does have offshore a subduction zone, the Cascadia subduction zone. So rupturing up through or along the coast of Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, you could have a 9.0. The last time that happened was in 1700. January 26, 1700. And how might we have known that date so precisely? What methods might have helped us understand that?
Tsunami records.
Tsunami records from where? Japan, rest. You know the story? Yeah. So the people living there at the time weren't keeping the calendar records that precise. Certainly people would have felt it, the Native Americans in the area. Maybe some of the trappers may have felt it but didn't report it. But records from Japan show that there's a very large tsunami came across the ocean. They were able to correlate that, and along with some other types of methodologies, dating and whatnot, but that specific date. Anyway, so we can't have these large earthquakes. Fortunately, in most of California, really an 8.0, 8.1 or 2 is probably the largest earthquake on the San Andreas that we'll experience. And back in 2007, a project with the U.S. Geological Survey was started to work with government officials and others in applying earthquake research to their needs. And what they said is what they need is a really good earthquake scenario, not just what will happen when the fault ruptures, but how the waves will propagate, what the damage it will do, how that will affect us. And it was called the ShakeOut scenario. It was for a magnitude 7.8. And for most people living in Southern California, the largest really damaging earthquake they've experienced was the Northridge earthquake in 1994. The largest earthquake they've experienced was around 7.3, but several hundred kilometers inland. In fact, when that was called the Landers earthquake in 1992. And in 1992, June 28th, I was actually in Irkutsk, Siberia. I was 20 years old, I was a sophomore at UCLA, and got to go do a research project in Siberia and Mongolia. And I went into the lab and said, Mark, there was a 7.5 earthquake in Los Angeles. That's what I was told. But this was 1992, so you couldn't just look on the internet, you couldn't go online, you couldn't turn on the TV. I had to go listen to the shortwave Radio Moscow. And fortunately was told it was 150 kilometers east of Los Angeles, which I knew was desert and not very populated. So that I was a little relieved that it wasn't what I first heard. But this is that type of location, and this is a much larger earthquake, 7.8. Is something like 8 times larger than a 7.2 in terms of the energy release. And it was also, that earthquake I was talking about was on a fault running kind of north-south over here, so the directivity effects really shook an area that has very few people living in. Versus the San Andreas, this is a suggested epicenter. It could really be anywhere along this fault, shown in black. But the goal was to really understand what type of earthquake shaking would affect the most people in the biggest way in Southern California. And so they chose to start at the southern end and rupture towards the northwest. And this is a scenario shake map of this event. So you have, as expected, the highest shaking along the fault, but you also have areas of shaking away from the fault that are going into the basin sedimentary basins of the Los Angeles region. And so that's where you see this kind of these odd areas of red pretty far from the fault compared to other parts that don't have those deep sedimentary basins. So that was part of the story that we started to tell people, that you can have an earthquake whose epicenter is actually far away, which people normally think of means you're okay if you're far from the epicenter. But with this type of earthquake, you could have really bad damage farther away because of these types of secondary effects, wave propagation effects coming in through, being channeled in through waveguides in the basin structure, and coming in also soil conditions and other aspects that are amplifying that shaking. The previous study showed that compared to the mountains of the region, the basin could be amplified shaking up to 7 times compared to someone living in the mountains. So this is pretty significant. And also that people would feel shaking for over 2 minutes. You know, you have to have a very large earthquake for that duration of shaking. I think at 9.0, people can experience shaking, some places maybe 8, 9 minutes. But even they say even after a minute, it just seems like it's going on forever at that point, that the shaking is never going to stop your experience of it. So this will be a different type of earthquake than people have experienced, and we wanted to kind of tell that story. One of the ways we did that is create fairly sophisticated 3D visualizations using supercomputers. This is one of kind of the way that this was animated. So over on the left you have the earthquake starting at the epicenter. This region here is called the Salton Sea, which is its own very interesting history. I encourage you to look it up. But it's starting on what's called Bombay Beach on the Salton Sea, rupturing to the northwest. You can see the P wave here in blue. And then this is also the kind of the same animations. You can see you'll see the blue about to arrive, so the P wave are coming in. So from the start of the earthquake at the epicenter to now, it's been 37 seconds. And so you'll have that P wave coming through. Perhaps by this distance from the earthquake, even though it's a large earthquake, that P wave is not going to be very strong. Likely people will feel it. They may think when they feel that the earthquake is now over, because it shook, stopped shaking. Well, what we see now coming more slowly because of the differences in the wave speeds, are the S waves and other waves coming through. You know, it's going to be about 30, 40 seconds later. You can imagine, it felt like maybe a local 4.0 or something. It's shook, it's over, now you go on with your life. You don't realize that what's coming is this much larger shaking. This is exaggerating 1,000 times because we're up and high off the ground. So the whole of Los Angeles Airport here isn't moving around as far as showing here, the harbor's not moving like that. But it is, in many of the places in dark red, 2 meters per second shaking. Can't even go 2 meters, it'll be close. Right, back and forth. Things will be damaged, especially taller buildings from that type of shaking. Smaller buildings, smaller homes might be able to ride with that. I was probably even moving a little too quickly there. But the taller buildings in downtown Los Angeles and elsewhere are going to be particularly vulnerable to this type of shaking, this long period shaking. So this is one of the ways. We actually made 16 videos like this for different points around Southern California. That's a way of kind of getting people to understand what might happen in a scenario that's beyond their past experience. So in this earthquake, with that widespread shaking, that long-lasting shaking, that we might have 300,000 buildings that are significantly damaged. That's defined as 10% of their value. It's significant. So if it's $500,000, $50,000 of damage, that's significant to people. It's not collapse. Some of these will be full collapse, but a lot of buildings will be repairable, maybe even inhabitable, but require a lot of work. The infrastructure damage is going to affect even more people throughout lack of water, power, other utilities for days to weeks to months. And the damage is there. This was back in 2008, so $2008, $213 billion is not just the damage caused by shaking, it's also the damage caused by fires and also the economic disruption that that will cause, where businesses can't reopen ever, perhaps, or for a long time. People can't go to work because their work requires power, and they can't do the manufacturing or whatever they might need. Also, a lot of people who will live temporarily, at least, out of their homes. A lot of injuries that require some degree of hospitalization. May not be a long stay, but going to the hospital to get stitched up. And the deaths could be even higher depending on what specific building might be damaged. It's hard to model that at that level. But this is less than 0.1% of the population. Most people are going to be living through this, and then it's like, what is the situation they're going to be living in is going to be beyond how life has normally been. Yes?
Could you just ask about what would be the insured cost of 230 billion? How much would be the insured fraction of it?
I believe in this scenario, it's probably only about 40 billion because of the economic impact is part of it. The fire aspect gets a little bit interesting. A lot of that's going to be personal fire insurance for the homes. It might be also commercial insurance. It's not going to cover it all, certainly. That's going to be an issue that's where the kind of government resources have to come in, and part of that loss is how long that recovery will then take.
But the point is you can insure for earthquake damage in that area.
And they do.
Yes, and that's a very interesting quick story. In the Northridge earthquake, prior to the Northridge earthquake, reset that a little bit. So prior to the Northridge earthquake, if you were an insurance company and you were offering home insurance, you had to also offer as an extra policy earthquake insurance. People had the option of whether they paid for it, but you had to offer it. After the Northridge earthquake, and so they were offering it, but they were kind of throwing it away. It wasn't very expensive. There hadn't been a lot of earthquakes, so the insurance companies weren't charging a lot for the earthquake insurance. What ended up happening is a lot of people had earthquake insurance, and then the earthquake happened, and then the companies basically almost went bankrupt because they had too many people in one area. They hadn't planned it outright. And so they said, we're not going to offer earthquake insurance anymore. But because of the law saying that if you provide homeowners insurance, that you also have to provide earthquake insurance. So the crisis became is they were going to stop offering homeowners insurance. And you can't buy a home unless you have homeowners insurance, so that mortgage companies wouldn't. And so it was going to be a big financial crisis because of that. And so the state acted quickly and set up a group called the California Earthquake Authority, which is like a non-profit, quasi-state group that would then organize and make available, along with all the insurance companies, to kind of set up this collaborative type of work so that no one company would have that exposure anymore. Fire is covered by your homeowner's insurance. So there's some people who might say, if you have a lot of earthquake damage and you don't have earthquake insurance, then set your house on fire. That is not recommended. But some people kind of think that. They would figure that out, I think. So this is a typical part of the very densely populated part of Southern California, where you have homes for hundreds of square miles that are like this, so you can have a fire start in one home, and without the water, if the firefighters are rescuing people, these fires can be called super conflagrations that destroy hundreds of blocks of homes. That in this scenario alone, you would need 1,600 separate fire engines to come to deal with these fires, and there aren't that many. And some of them would require 2 engines, 2 companies coming in. And then we also have a situation called the Santa Ana wind condition, which without an earthquake has wildfires, very dry and weather condition with a lot of winds. So this is not assuming that the earthquake happens during that type of condition. So ultimately the losses that are in this scenario are double if you factor in the fire following earthquake. Good news is that because a lot of our buildings in California compared to here are much younger and have been built when there were building codes, and the building codes have been progressively getting better, and the type of construction, the follow through, the implementation implementation of these codes is very good. You know, you have some countries that have, like in Haiti, they had some degree of a building code, but there was no enforcement of that building code. We've had better luck in California. Cities are requiring retrofitting of certain types of structures. Los Angeles has, last year, actually as a result of the ShakeOut scenario, has enacted stricter regulations on certain types of buildings. This is actually my house. I have a raised foundation, the concrete foundation there, and then there are these little stilts, and there's a crawl space underneath. This part here is called a cripple wall. Horrible name for basically where you're raised up off the foundation. And the fix is to either bolt straight down this base plate into the concrete, because often when they were built, my home was built in 1926, it would just sit on top of there because you're worried about, what you're worried about is the building staying up rather than being shaken sideways. So they didn't even bolt it down, they just lay it on. And so adding those bolts, this wall was so short in my house that they couldn't put the drill and the bolt coming down so you couldn't go sideways into it. And then you also put the sheet of wood on covering that. So rather than it being up on stilts, the ground moves and your house moves separately from that. It connects everything together so you move as one piece. So that's the type of retrofitting. Again, the California Earthquake Authority, the group that got set up, is actually offering people $3,000 who have this type of home. Now, wasn't available when I did the work 7 years ago. But in fact, that's been going around in different zip codes. So it finally got to my area, and I literally went door to door around my neighborhood saying, like I was a salesperson for them, you know, sign up here. But it was because you can get $3,000. Now that's me being a good neighbor, but it's also me making sure that my neighbors' houses don't fall off their foundation, break their gas lines, and cause a fire and burn my house down. Right? So it's all critical to us all being together at every level by each and every one of us, making sure that we're continuing to improve our earthquake resiliency. Now, a little bit more about the program that I run at the Earthquake Center. Communication, education, and outreach. We have kind of four main areas: the public education, preparedness that I'm focusing today on. Also a grade school, primary school, and into early higher education, what we call K through 14 education initiative, and things that we do there, including deployment of school seismometers. Our experiential learning and career advancement program, which is internships. Typically, these are internships. The way the funding is for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, but we have had some students from other countries come who have their own funding, and we can arrange to work with different scientists from around our collaboration. Then also our knowledge implementation, which is how we work with engineers and others. And our theme we call Partner Globally, Prepare Locally. We're working with a lot of people from many places, so we're encouraging people to get prepared, not only prepared like be safer for earthquakes, but prepared educationally and all those aspects. But for earthquakes, one question that we work with a lot of social scientists on, and we want to make sure that if we're going to be promoting people to take certain actions, that we're doing that as effectively as we can. So the question is, what motivates people to take preparedness actions? Any guesses what motivates someone to get prepared for earthquakes? An earthquake, yes. That is the number one thing, but it's hard to plan that. It's not really a good strategy to wait for that, or to kind of come in too quickly after people have experienced bad losses. Say, oh, this is great, now we get prepared. No, you have to be sensitive to these. So one of the things that some people think is, well, if you really show them these horrible pictures from around the world where all these buildings are collapsed and people died, then you'll scare them. And that's why people get prepared after earthquakes, because they're seeing these things. But there have been studies that show that it's really not the case, that there's some bump in those who are already ready, already thinking about getting prepared, have been putting it off for a long time, and it's more of a reminder. An earthquake happens, it's a reminder, or they see something just because it's been put out, some scary messaging, who say, oh yeah, I should finally do something. But for others, it's a deterrent to their taking action. They get scared, they don't even want to deal with it, they turn off. Another, in both of these studies that have been done, really kind of show that it doesn't help, that what we call fear-based appeals isn't what makes people take real action. That there's a theory called communicating actionable risk that basically was a series. This is one kind of set of results. Wow, it's like I touched it and I did that. That from some surveys, so there's a number of studies that have been developing this theory of various factors, and you don't have to look at this in too detail, but there are certain factors that lead to actual preparedness actions being taken. And to summarize that, there was what matters is what you think might matter doesn't as much. And this is a little bit hard for as a scientist to kind of consider that the, I'm sorry, there's something on this screen that doesn't appear as good. That telling people about their probabilities, oh, there's going to be a 60% chance of an earthquake or a 70% chance or a 50% chance, that will motivate certain actions. The research shows us it really doesn't. They don't know that. People in general don't understand probabilities. They kind of can in terms of the weather, where it's a 50% chance of rain or a 10%, they get kind of relative, but earthquake probabilities typically are over 30-year periods. And what does that mean? They hear 50% chance in 30 years. They think in 30 years from now, there's a 50% chance. Or not that it could really still happen today. And if you want to talk about today, then you're talking about 0.002% chance, and people say it's not going to happen today, even though it really could. So probabilities are very challenged. Fear, and you would think that demographics would have something that would affect in terms of people's ability to get prepared, and some of it does in terms of the affordability of some of the actions and the way that people are getting information. But what really matters is are kind of three main other factors. What people are seeing and hearing about, and that they're hearing about from each other as much as possible, not necessarily from experts, but they're having conversations and they're seeing people take action. That the information that they're getting is, when you talk to people about what can happen, the dangers, the damage, that you're providing actions to take to deal with those situations in the same messaging. And then also the density, how often they're hearing about it, and they're not hearing conflicting information from one group saying one thing, another group saying another approach, another thing like that, but that if you can manage everything in blue over here, then you're giving people real actionable steps based on this research. And so we formed a group about 15 years ago now in Southern California called the Earthquake Country Alliance to put a lot of that information into kind of play into how we would approach this situation. So public-private, meaning the government as well as the businesses as well as grassroots leaders working together. It's very important when you want to organize something like this. Making it regional. California is a very big state, so we organize local efforts as well. And we get funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and have a website. Our main activities are bringing that messaging together, having consistency, getting a lot of experts to work together to have a consensus approach so that each organization is kind of putting out the same messaging. We do have two major kind of activities, both for tsunami preparedness, and then we'll be talking a lot about more of the ShakeOut, which happens in the fall each year. Now, I mentioned the San Andreas movie earlier. One of the things that it got wrong was kind of talking about what to do during earthquakes. It said go stand next to a building during an earthquake. But even before the movie, and you'll be safer than away from the building. It's very strange. One of the things that we did as this alliance is we worked together in advance of the movie coming out, developed a website, earthquakecountry.org/San Andreas, with kind of talking points, resources. We made a kind of some animations so that the media and the public could go and find out, is San Andreas a documentary, or is it a what might happen, or what was wrong with it? And it turns out there were some aspects that were actually okay with the movie. It did show the scientists, at least, knowing to get down under something to protect yourself from things that are falling. The daughter of The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, the actress who played his daughter, is shown demonstrating good behaviors throughout the movie. Now, she is demonstrating, like her father, that you can steal things that you need during an earthquake. If you know the movie, he first steals a helicopter, then he steals a truck, and he steals a plane, and then she steals something off a fire truck. That's not really recommended, but the aspects that she was talking about underneath, including that in an earthquake, your cell phone probably isn't going to work. Landlines, you might be able to get to work, but only for long distance calls. It's a whole thing where they shut off the local lines for emergency responders only. And also the issue of fires that will happen after an earthquake. So there were some aspects that were good. Overall, now they're going to do a San Andreas 2, and it's going to be like even bigger. And of course, it's not even going to be all on San Andreas, but they have to keep it in. So the website has what we call the 7 steps to earthquake safety, hazard and risk information for California, various booklets. I do have some booklets here if you're kind of interested in this. Feel free to come up and take one. It talks about how we can communicate information to the public about what they can do before, during, and after. And the 7 steps to earthquake safety are the kind of guidelines for organizing all that type of information, what you do before, during, and after, into a kind of a framework. Each of these has a lot of information, but we start off by saying you should secure your space. And what this means is making sure things aren't going to fall on you as best you can, either moving heavy things to a lower location, or strapping or bolting furniture to the walls, TVs. We had an earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2014. We had only one person died. It was in the middle of the night. She was watching TV. She was falling asleep in her chair, and her TV was thrown at her. She did not die right away. In fact, it was a couple months, but she got a concussion from that. And if that TV had been strapped down, she would be fine today. So these types of activities are a low-cost approach that a lot of people can do compared to retrofitting a home. To focus on what to do during an earthquake, the kind of global standardized message is called drop, cover, and hold on. Dropping to the floor where you are, covering your head and neck with one arm and hand as you look around to see, is there some place I can get for additional safety? This may seem crazy. Why would you just run out of the building? Well, there's probably no time. In almost many situations, you won't have time, and if you run out the building, often things are falling off the building, off the outside, more so than even inside. 2 other people died in an earthquake in 2003 in Central California in a store where they were told by the store owner, run out, get out. And they did, and the brick facade of the building fell onto them as they left. And if they had stayed inside, they would have been completely fine. It's interesting, there's obviously, you may have pictures in your head right now from earthquakes around the world where you see these collapsed buildings, and it's horrible. But what you often will see in those pictures and video, that around those buildings, there are a lot of buildings that are still standing. There's even a picture from Nepal where it was a brick building, and the brick had fallen off the building, completely, 10 feet of rubble around the building, but you could see inside, and the furniture hadn't even moved inside that building. So this is one aspect of where things do fall inside, you're protecting yourself. And I'm going to come back to that topic in a little bit. But basically, this is the type of situation. This is from Christchurch, New Zealand, an office space where things can fall, lights like this, projectors like that. Everyone's okay with that projectors, no one's sitting right underneath them in an earthquake. And if you were able to get under something or protect yourself from things falling. Here's a school in California. Fortunately, it was on Easter Sunday, so no one was there. We've been quite lucky in California along those lines. We really haven't had a major earthquake while school is in session, ever. Now, there was a big earthquake in 1933 in Long Beach where a lot of the schools were collapsed. It was at 6 p.m. and at that point, the state legislature came together very quickly and passed regulations that have since kept the buildings, the school buildings, to be among the safest in the state, inspired by that earthquake. Now, so this is a graphic that was created back in 2008 when we started the ShakeOut earthquake. And it's been really interesting to see as we've kind of expanded this, how these messages or these graphics have been spread around the world, not by us, but just picked up and taken. And because this project is related to Bhutan, someone had sent me this graphic from Bhutan where they had made their own version. I know this was based on ours because we have the exclamation points and the arrows, but they customized it to Bhutan, which is exciting to have seen. One of the aspects, of course, in this type of messaging is how do you apply it in different regions around the world? How do you customize it? Is this appropriate for developing countries with different types of building construction? And there was a large group that came together under the Geohazards International Group to study messaging and how do you adapt this for different regions. And they looked at all the factors you want to consider of the beliefs, the building stock, the population, the social considerations, and the local earthquake hazards, and understood that you need to develop content for the majority, but then you also need to have specialized content for certain groups. It's just a very complicated situation to deal with. There isn't really one right answer. But they looked at, okay, densely populated, URM, brick-type buildings, how do you modify the messaging if those are more likely to collapse? Do you tell people to run outside? Well, maybe. So look at this chart. So are most buildings likely to collapse? No, then stay inside. Yes. Are the exits adequate for enough people to get out? You may have heard also get in a doorway during earthquakes. How many doors are in this room and how many are us? And it gets issues like that. But can you even get out? Yes, there are enough. Well, is there even an open space when you get out? Is there another building 4 feet across the little alley that is going to be falling on you as well as potentially your own building? And let's say yes, there's open. Are there danger zones just outside? Yes. Then evaluate the risk of falling debris. No. Maybe be outside. But if there's not a open space, no safe choice, then maybe stay inside. Ultimately, the message is if you're in the best kind of way that this has been worked out, if you're on the first floor of such a building, you might have time to get out. And that might be the recommendation. If you're on a second or third floor, you're not going to have time to get out during the shaking. You're safer staying where you are and hoping that it's going to be like one of those buildings like I mentioned in Nepal, where maybe the brick facade falls off, but you're safer inside. It's very complicated. We've been kind of working on this messaging, and that was the 2008 version. Just last year we updated it because we realized that our messaging had evolved to say, don't drop under a table, maybe there's not a table, or don't bang your head on the table as that person looks like they're about to do, but to get down where you are, and then if you can get under something, literally if you can crawl to it. This is the type of earthquake where you don't have any warning. Typically that's the case. In some countries, and soon in the western US, you have an early warning system where we might have some advanced, a few seconds of warning. But you want to get down and then already be covering your head and neck is the most important part to be protecting, and perhaps be moving under shelter or get next to a wall. But then, of course, there's many other situations. So we've even made this new poster that has 9 different situations and kind of like a little game of where these are represented, and there's fun things to find in the graphic. And I do have a couple of these here. Fortunately, the people who printed it at FEMA printed it smaller than it was supposed to be, so break out your magnifying ones when you want to read what it says. But the overall goal here is to get people thinking about that there is not just a one-size-fits-all answer, but kind of where are you, what type of building are you in, all these factors. And so it's not just about the table, as this shows. We've also created messaging for people with disabilities. So what to do if you're using a cane, walker, or wheelchair. And we have a whole web page about those factors as well. And we've created videos of each of these different things, kind of like an airline safety video, what to do in different situations. All of this is now being used as part of our great ShakeOut earthquake drills, where last year we had 55 million people doing earthquake practice around the world on one day or throughout the year. And this year that date is October 19th. I encourage all of you to participate. How many of you, I asked earlier, if you felt an earthquake, you might go to a place where there are earthquakes in the future. Practicing it here makes total sense. Everybody in the world should know how to protect themselves. Maybe you're not practicing it as every year or something, but having that actual chance to experience getting down on the ground. It sounds silly, but we've had a lot of people say, I always thought that wasn't a big deal, and then I actually did it one time, and I found I have no room under my desk to get under, these types of factors. So we did start this in Southern California. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, and then people in other places said we want to do it too, and it kind of grew and grew. And then coming back to that social science research of the factors that kind of motivate people to take action, is that they're seeing and hearing consistent information from multiple sources in multiple formats. They're seeing other people like themselves get prepared. So if you ever want to motivate someone to take an action, do it and make sure they see you do it. Kind of like, maybe that's a very generic thing, but that makes sense, right? It's kind of role modeling, and that includes these type of preparedness steps. Then you're getting people asking questions like, well, how much did that cost? How long did it take you to do? And you start to really figure this out. It's not longer some conceptual good idea. It's a matter of reality. Getting people to talk with people, that's also very key. And then very importantly, when you talk about what can happen, include in that what to do to avoid those issues. Our goals are to encourage people to worldwide practice earthquake safety through shifting the culture about earthquakes and preparedness. Everywhere this is an issue, people don't want to deal with the dangers in our day-to-day lives. We normalize that risk. We say, we're okay. It's not going to happen to me. It happens over there. It happens to those types of people. Whatever it is that we do to justify getting up out of bed and going throughout our lives. You know, I'm a safe driver. No one's going to hit me. Right? Does it make sense? But we do it anyway. All those factors that normalize that risk. So that's an aspect of shifting the culture. And then from that, increasing the overall readiness. So it's not just about practicing the earthquake safety, but that being an initial conversation that gets people to do other things too. So our mission is everyone everywhere should know how to protect themselves from earthquakes. We think they should know how to protect themselves from other things too, but this is our focus and our activity. And what that's meant is a growing number of people in many parts of the US, almost every state and territory that we have, and then in Canada and other places that I'll show you in a second. We have people come into a website and register what they're doing, and by about 20 different categories. Schools and colleges are by far the highest numbers of participants, along with businesses and government and all sorts of groups that we allow people to be recognized as. Our website at shakeout.org kind of shows the participation from all these different regions. Each region has its own website. Each website then is where people can get very customized information. This is showing each one of these states is its own ShakeOut region. We have, in the East Coast, we have 3 multi-state regions. Then we also have participation in Yukon, British Columbia, and Quebec. In southern Italy, that was actually the US Navy bases in Italy wanted to join, and then they kind of faded off, but the Southern Italians continue to register. New Zealand, Japan, and elsewhere too. So these are the different websites we do in English and French and Italian and Spanish and Japanese, and a Japanese ShakeOut website. New Zealand is huge down there. It's really quite something to see how they've taken this on. We even work with a group called the Aga Khan Development Network that works across Central Asia, and many countries around the world. They have schools and colleges and hospitals, and this is a group that we may want to see how they're involved in Bhutan. We kind of created their own webpage for a kind of a nonprofit group too. And we have a webpage in Spanish, kind of for global access as well. The registration form is kind of part of it. They fill out, they describe what they're doing, how many people, etc. And then that contributes to the statistics that we have, kind of by region, and then within each region by category, and then for each category we list the people and their organizations at their option. And people want to be on this list. It's the funniest thing. Why aren't we on the list? Well, because you're looking on the business and you're a business, but when you registered, you selected schools, and we don't know why, but we fixed it, and now they're happy they're in the right place. But people have said, I wasn't able to get our owner of our company to do anything for safety. But then I showed that all these other companies in our region are doing this, and I was able to say, and he said, okay, fine, we'll do it. We want to be in the group. So it's really interesting, these kind of peer pressure aspects that are involved with this type of thing. So we have a lot of elements, partnerships, and the website, and the materials we develop, and radio and TV messaging, a lot of social media engagement. Drill manuals for various groups on how to participate. We even have higher education resources so that you have a 4-slide PowerPoint that a professor can show during class and not take a lot of time, and have their students participate. It's easier to get a high school student or a teacher to do this because the school is requiring it. We all know it's hard to require university faculty to do things like this. This is our experience in the US because they have a lot to cover in their classes and they don't want to take the time. Perhaps we've made this simple for them too. So this is available on that website. And there has been evaluation. We do a survey of all the participants each year and asking them kind of how did they participate, why did they participate, what actions did it lead to them. And so some interesting things that we're asking them what they do generally to get prepared for earthquakes, and how much of a factor did their ShakeOut participation contribute to that versus just other reasons that they might have taken this action. So we're starting to see that one thing, like companies, for example, encouraging their staff to get prepared at home, which is really important. If your employees don't come back to work because they're dealing with their home situation, then your business will suffer. So more of that happening, more training, securing of furniture, these types of things. Because we're asking them to get down under their desk for a minute, they're securing furniture and they're providing more training. So by asking this very simple ask, they're doing much more. Early on, we discovered if we ask a lot of people, then they'll do nothing. If you ask very little, then they'll do a lot. It's kind of interesting psychology about that in some sense. And then also for individuals and families, all the various things that people are doing in addition to just a simple drill. And kind of qualitative results too of what's causing people to participate, the information they're getting, the idea of it being a professional responsibility or having safety, peace of mind that you've taken some action to help your family or your business be safe. That's a key aspect. The idea of course, recent earthquakes and other aspects of this being part of it. We sent a lot of information out and that's helping. But that the results here talking about, again, asking you to do this very simple action, that there's all these factors such as increased confidence, awareness, and neighborhood readiness, that they're reinforcing their buildings. A lot of interesting results that have not been in a brute force type of way, but in a very kind of a community spirit type of way that we like to see coming out from here. So, not kidding, if you want to participate, you can register as yourself or as your school or whatnot, shakeout.org. We have had schools in the UK participate. I've seen videos of it they've shared and have been very excited to be involved in this international thing. I looked for it, but I couldn't find it putting this talk together. A lot of resources and messaging, so if you're on social media and you like to talk about things that can help people worldwide, you can use some of our messaging. This is the animated GIF here that you can post at. You can follow us too on Facebook and on Twitter at ShakeOut. This is like a trending thing each year on the ShakeOut Day all across the US and other countries too. It's really phenomenal that something we thought would be a one-time thing has just had a life of its own and continued to come on. I'm really excited to be working with this group to talk about kind of how we adapt this perhaps in Bhutan. And maybe one day there will be a great United Kingdom ShakeOut. Please join us in whatever way that you might. Thank you.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Mark?
Yes.
Get it right, drop, cover, hold on
Yes.
scheme seems to deal with the first shock. How does it deal with aftershocks, which may be just things, and secondary hazards?
Right, so the messaging is be ready to drop, cover, and hold on again for if there's an aftershock. And it is a little bit of a, what do you do right afterwards? You don't want to get back up too quickly because you can have continued shaking. You don't expect, things could still be wobbling and falling. But at some point you do have to get back up. And then the aftershock is just like it's a new earthquake. And then if there's other issues that you have to adapt of course if your house or building is on fire, then we don't recommend that you stay at the table. So you have to be, the issue becomes, all those factors become so variable that you have to make those calls.
Surely you must give some guidance for the aftershocks, which might be the next day or 2 days later.
Not really. It's as if they're another earthquake. You do the same thing for the first earthquake that you do for the aftershocks. Some people don't like to, depending on the type of building you're in, some people may not go back into those buildings in that high aftershock period. But in terms of the action of what to do to protect yourself, it's the same. Yes?
So, sort of along those lines, I mean, is there consideration of just cascading sequences? For example, you have a bunch of rains going on in Southern California. Earthquake happens. That makes other structures and other things, potential dams, failure, all sorts of things.
Yep.
Has there been consideration of that?
Definitely. Yeah, so people who are in the floodplains of dams have additional drills, information, where there's tests of the alert systems and knowing their routes to get out of that, the inundation area is a factor there too. Yes, Francis?
Oh, go on, Jenny. Okay. I was just curious, I'm thinking of Bhutan, but also beyond Bhutan.
Yep.
What, maybe 1 or 2 key issues have you experienced taking ShakeOut out of California or the US and into other countries, and in particular developing communities at risk of hazards?
Yeah, that's where we haven't really taken ShakeOut in a level of it organized in the messaging as we have in New Zealand, Canada. And we're not trying to do that as much.
Is there a reason for that?
But because it needs to be adapted more, but we're not, well, it's more that we're not able to kind of continue the level of support we've been doing. It's just beyond our staff. But what we're starting to do is basically develop the best practices or to archive and bring together what different countries are doing. Like for example, in Iran, every year for the last 15 years, they have all their schools do it very similar to drill as this. How do they get that happening? What's happening in other countries across Central Asia? I refer to the report that brought a lot of people together to figure out these issues. And so we're not trying to necessarily have ShakeOut become a global brand, but more like a clearinghouse for what different countries are doing so they can learn from each other and how they're modifying the messaging. The messaging, as that group kind of figured out, it doesn't really change as much as we might think because of the complexity of the building types and not being able to get out. That, it's not like there's, in this country you don't do drop, cover, hold on, in this country you do. It's, you have to, in the developed world where the building codes are better and all, you're more likely to be better off. Drop if you do get under something, protect yourself. But even in developing countries, it ends up probably being your best bet too. But how you're messaging that, because that might seem crazy to those people that you're telling that don't run outside of your building, you're better off inside. How do you message that becomes different necessarily than what the message itself is. So a lot of cultural aspects that you want to bring in, and who's doing the messaging that is also a big part of that.
Can I follow up? Actually, so specifically with the Philippines, I don't know to what extent you were specifically involved in the Philippines. Do you have any, how did that,
so in the Philippines, there's this huge exercise in Metro Manila the last couple of years in the summer that it's been messaging at Drop the Rohan and something like 8 million people in one day kind of in the city in various aspects of what more of an exercise sense to. And they're very kind of web-oriented, social media-oriented in terms of the promotion of that. I like their website better than my website. But in terms of, it's a newer website, we had to redo our website, all these aspects. So I'm jealous. But you have to adapt this for each culture, and they did that. Francis?
I was just wondering whether you actually get involved in any disaster planning scenarios with the emergency services, not necessarily in the US, but if you're working with a developing country, or is it just the sort of drop cover and hold on message?
Yeah, I haven't worked, in New Zealand to a certain extent, but most of that work that I've done is in California, even working with our emergency management partners. And a lot, of course, on that scenario that was developed.
So during the Great Shakeout Day, you actually do kind of drills with the fire department and the medical department to actually...
Thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah, happening all over the place. Typically in Los Angeles, we'll have a major kind of media-focused event starting at 3:30 in the morning. We'll have, because we have, I don't know if you have that early news here, we have our local TV stations with 4 a.m. news all the way through the morning, and so we'll be broadcasting from that location. We have an earthquake simulator vehicle that comes in, and the reporters are interviewing someone, and then it'll start to shake, and they drop down. A lot of fun. So that happens, and we'll have huge media focus, and that is important there's all those people throughout the region who may not even know that when they go to work that day, there's going to be an earthquake drill. You can imagine, you come into your work, you have a lot of stuff you have to do that day. I had such a busy day. And then John comes along and says, oh, and at 10:20, we're all going to do an earthquake drill. And you say, okay, at 10:20, I'm going to be out. I'm going to go out of the building so I don't have to do that, so I can keep working. So you have those factors to deal with. But if you see it on the morning news and you see that it's this big thing, you see that everyone's doing, it's not just John who's telling you what to do, but it's really kind of this international thing. People have told us that helps, that they're kind of getting the participation of their employees. So that's also an interesting factor, that whole media exposure leading up to that. And so last year we were at a school, we had the fire department respond, we had students who were done up with makeup to look at they've been injured, and people being taken to the hospitals, all those types of activities. That's like an extension of what most people are doing, where they're just practicing that kind of drop or hold on stuff. Yes?
I'm interested in how eventually you settled on the type of marketing that you found worked best. And I was curious if that's something where you relied on social scientists, or whether that's something that maybe even the seismic community came up, or even to the point where you had focus groups where you talk about what do you think about the words ShakeOut or these series of pictographs to sort of elicit this response, or sort of trying to make people want to respond.
Yeah, so some of these kind of the graphic pictographs have been around for a long time. We did some tweaks to them even in 2008. And there have been focused kind of group studies on that messaging. I would say ShakeOut has evolved along with social media. So 2008, you know, is when Twitter and Facebook really started to take off, and so we've kind of grown with social media. A lot of the work that we've done in terms of marketing is reaching out to networks of groups like schools, the state school groups, the business community, and it's just very kind of grassroots growing that out there, not requiring the whole population to do anything. No one has the ability to do that, you know, so it's very, you know, in the U.S. it's very web-based. That can't always be the case everywhere. But increasingly it can be. I think we were talking about in Bhutan that even though that maybe the population is low literacy, that everybody might have a smartphone or there's someone in their region, and you could be showing videos of what to do and graphical information. So those types of things have to be factored in. Some of the information we did, focus groups with a art institute in Los Angeles in terms of the graphic design of various posters and things that we had, and we're actually looking to kind of redo all that in that process again as well. Thanks.
But the social science that you cited was really critical in helping at least me understand that probabilities do not lead to actions.
Not in the kind of preparedness action realm. I should follow up that probabilities are of immense value to the you know, designing of buildings and the planning at that level. So they're needed in order to understand what the buildings will be designed for. Though, you know, one thing to keep in mind with building codes and such is that the building is built to the code of the time it was built. It's rare that buildings are required to be upgraded. We have a lot of buildings built in Southern California, tall, high-rise buildings in the 1960s that were designed to withstand an 8.0 on the San Andreas Fault. Some level of shaking expected by scientists in the 1960s for what the shaking in downtown LA would be during an earthquake on the San Andreas. So those buildings are existing. They're designed for the 1960s era understanding of what that ground motion will be like. We now know that that ground motion is going to be much greater. The buildings are not changing for the most part. There are some buildings that are called non-ductile concrete buildings that the city of Los Angeles has just last year passed an ordinance to require over some 30-year period that those buildings get improved because those are particularly vulnerable to collapse. And a lot of them were built in the 1960s. And they're like a concrete column building that you can't tell from the outside how much steel is within those columns. And so even knowing which buildings have to be fixed is a very expensive process to understand, because if there's not enough steel, then the buildings will crumble. If there's enough steel, then maybe they won't. So a lot of those issues have to be taken into account.
Okay. Burning questions? If not, let's thank
One last
burning question.
Do you have a protocol which limits the number of people from your centre who can speak to the media about things like probabilities?
No, not like that type of protocol, but typically we only have a few of us to do. And I would say that that is something that we're continuing to figure out, even the way to talk about probabilities to the media. The scientists, myself and others, we're not necessarily doing that right. It's something we always want to be looking at how to do that better, and that really requires kind of focus groups and these types of things that typically a seismologist who's been in the career for 30 years doesn't want to have to be told what to do by such studies. It's complicated.
Okay, all right, let's thank Mark for his great talk.
It's the first time I've done a talk where for me it's 4 a.m. right now, so So,
And
I held it together.
please join us this evening for Aaron's talk.